This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexapol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexapol.com. That's Lexapol.com. Hello and welcome back to another edition of EMS One-Stop. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. And if you've been following through the series, you know there's a bit of a theme emerging, and that's about quality and improvement. Of course, we've had the great Taigman on and in a recent edition, and we're going to continue that theme. And the topic of today is quality as an organizational strategy, which is also the title of a book that's published by a number of authors, including my guest, Dave Williams, also joined by Dr. Jon Studnek, who is the newish executive director of Wake County EMS. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining me. So,
thanks, Rob. Great to be here.
Dave, first of all, we go back. I've done the Dave Williams Mr. Potato Head class. I found it fascinating, and actually we'll talk about that in a second. And thank you for doing what you're doing. But give us the Dave Williams backstory first of all.
All right. Well, as you said, I'm Dave Williams. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I mostly work doing quality as an organizational strategy with organizations around the world. Before I was an independent consultant, I worked as the senior lead of improvement science and methods and leadership at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And many moons ago, I got my start in ambulance service. I was the chief quality officer for Austin EMS. Near the turn of the century. I was a paramedic in Charlotte, which we're going to talk about at some point, a consultant with Fitch Associates, and a student of ambulance systems. And that's actually how being a kind of a subject matter expert in ambulance systems led to being a quality person, and then eventually led into my work with improvement science. And so thanks for having me.
Excellent. Dr. Studnek, welcome. And for those that haven't met you before, give us your backstory too, please.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Rob. Really excited to talk about quality improvement today. Somewhat similar pathway to Dave. Started my career early on as a first responder in Northern Arizona, running, like I like to tell people, 2s of calls a week, right? So a very small volume, rural EMS system. Went to University of New Mexico, where I got my paramedic certification and my early paramedic career out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Was then able to get a fellowship with the National Registry of EMTs and went to The Ohio State University. Got a master's degree and a PhD in public health and epidemiology with sponsorship through the National Registry of EMTs. And then landed in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I spent the last 15 years in a series of different roles, starting out focused on pre-hospital research and then quality improvement methods, and ended my time there as the Deputy Director of Operations. And then, like Rob said, in January of this year, was fortunate enough to transition over to Wake County, North Carolina as their Director of EMS. And have been here for about 8 months, learning a system and trying to figure out where we can make sure that we're delivering excellent patient care here in Wake County, and what systems we need to improve and what systems we need to just maintain.
So even as the resident Brit, I understand the importance of the before you say Ohio State University. I've been schooled in that, and so I'm glad that you carry that on. Before we get into the sort of the nuts and bolts of this, obviously, Dave, you've got a new book out, and so what is it, and where can we find it?
Right. So the new book is called Quality as an Organizational Strategy, How to Build a System of Improvement. It's available at all your favorite resellers. If you're Amazon or Barnes & Nobles, you can go right on and search. I'd encourage you to search one of my co-authors' names versus mine. And that's a very common name, but if you search Clifford Norman or Lloyd Provost, it'll come up within their books. So it's available right now. Did you want me to give some insight on the backstory of the book?
Yeah, please do. And before you do that, Dave, I just want to say that look in the show notes or indeed in the link below, if you're watching us on video, the Amazon link indeed will be there for everybody to click through. But anyway, yes, the book backstory.
So if you're familiar with quality improvement, especially if you've been involved with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, you've probably seen books by my co-authors, including the Improvement Guide and the Healthcare Data Guide. These are kind of the primary resources that are used in a lot of IHI's work, especially the Improvement Advisor Professional Development Program, and kind of the key books in improvement in healthcare, especially. One of the things, these are all folks that used to work with Dr. Edwards Deming, who was one of the kind of leaders in improvement, especially in the States, and Joseph Duran are commonly referred to as sort of those that laid the foundation for what we think about quality today. And one of the things that Deming talked about in his book, two things, is he framed the science of improvement that we know today, the four lenses of the science. And he also argued that much of improvement was focused at the project level, which is very common. That's where you start. That's where all improvement happens, is at a project level. But that many organizations were not fully leveraging the potential of transforming organizations. And the next level he talked about was taking that project level to like really big business systems, like, how do you fix your human resource process or your patient care process or your billing process, one of the major kind of like mainstays of your organization. And then the last, which he sort of argued needed to be pursued, was figuring out how to make quality your actual overarching strategy for leading and managing an organization, constantly improving it. And there's a diagram that he drew out many years ago. You've probably seen it. It looks like an arrow. It's a flow chart called Production Viewed as a System. It gets on a lot of slides and stuff. He said, this is how you think about an organization as a continuous learning organization that's constantly figuring out how to improve and get better to match the needs of your clients or your customers. And like a lot of Deming's work, it was a great theory, but he relied on other people to kind of turn that into action. And my colleagues started working in the 80s and 90s to convert that into a method using quality improvement and the methods behind the science of improvement that eventually converted into a workbook in the 80s and 90s. And then during the pandemic, I convinced them that we should finally publish it and turn it into both a book and a field guide. To bring this to folks, especially as many organizations are pursuing, trying to figure out how to do whole system quality in different ways around the world.
So I think that as an EMS community in particular, we're now very comfortable with the quality programs. So there was a time, of course, where we used tradition and time-honored, we always did it this way strategy. And my gut feeling says, I'm excited to say that we've moved on from that. And I was going back through my own sort of PowerPoint decks, and it was actually 14 years ago that I did a session at GEMS called Data, My Favorite Four-Letter Word. And I'm delighted to say that there are more and more people now doing data as time has gone on. And of course, that data, and I'm a firm believer in the intelligence cycle, right? Having information is one thing, doing something with it is actually a conscious activity to progress, right? So it's collection, collation, analysis, and action, and obviously the quality assessment that comes from that. So let's sort of drill down a little bit and sort of what for a leader that wishes to improve and to conduct quality as a strategy within their organization. There are a number of activities, Dave, that leaders should be undertaking.
So quality as an organizational strategy builds out what we call 5 activities, and they are things that are always going on in the organization. Most of us have some form of this existing in our organization, but where we focus is trying to figure out where you are and then trying to get to a kind of a high performance level. So those 5 activities, the first one is about understanding your purpose. And specifically, what is the organization's purpose in relation to the need that your service fulfills, which is a pretty interesting way to look at it. And most organizations have a purpose. They have a mission, vision, and values, but it's often something that's just hanging on a wall and not really connected to helping to guide the organization. And the reason that's important is that becomes the North Star, which is and then you build the system to meet that purpose, right? And so there are 2 things that help us with that. One is to actually have a systems view of the organization. You use the term emergency medical services system, right? So it's a system. But if you ask people to describe that system to you, they're going to show you an org chart or a geography map. And part of our method invites people to be able to actually look at their organization as a system of linked, interdependent processes. How do you actually create like a street map of your organization so you know where things are, what they are, and how they fit together? And how do you build with that a vector of measures or a dashboard? There's a lot of attention right now in EMS about wanting to bring measurement and bring a diversity of measures into understanding how things work. These are measures that are built to help to act as vital signs to your system and help you to be able to see, is it stable? Where do I need to act, or where do I don't? Or where is it not in relation to where I want it to be, and where do I need to focus my attention? Right. So these two help us to see the system and see how it's working. And we call that the system activity. Third one is known as the information activity, which is, so we've got this system, we've got a purpose we're trying to fulfill, but we need a method to be able to continually be learning from our community, learning from our patients, learning from other stakeholders, learning from our own people, and pulling that information to see if the system we have is still matching what we want it to or not, and whether we need to adapt that system or not. So we have to build ways and methods that help us to gather the right insight, pull that in, and be able to decide what to do with it. Do we have to act on it? Do you have to? Is it attached to something we're already trying to improve, or do we need to put it in place for future planning to focus in? And so building a holistic and robust system that gathers information that informs us, and then acting on that information the right way is the third activity. The fourth is actually having a planning process, a process where you take these diverse inputs, you study what's actually happening together, and instead of just saying, here's what I saw at the last conference, and or I want to buy this toy, you look at the delta or the gap between where you want to be and where you are, and you make conscious choices about either what you're going to change, what you're going to improve, or what do you need to do about the existing operations to just make sure it keeps meeting and satisfying the need of where things are today. And we call that operating. So you come up with two plans, planning to improve and planning to operate. And then the last is, let's say you decide that there's a portfolio of things that you need to change. How do you then turn around and have a method to be able to do improvement, to use a standard framework like the model for improvement and resource and design a charter improvement projects and get them to results in a timely fashion. So actually achieving your aim in, say, 4 to 6 months, and then taking that project, installing it, and moving on to the next one, and sort of having a continuous sort of queue of stuff that you want to fix and a method in which you can go about fixing it on a routine basis. And these 5 activities are a continuous cycle. So each year you're just kind of, you're continuing to build each of them and getting them to be more robust, and you're using them together to build a continuous learning organization, continuous improvement organization.
Fantastic. Thank you. So that was almost the recipe, the to-do list, the action items. When we come back after the break, we're going to bring Dr. Studnek in and talk about a very practical real-world example of this in action. So for the moment, let's just have a quick word from our sponsor.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
And we're back. Yeah, thank you to my voiceover artist, Jim Dudley. Of course, you'll know that Jim is the voice of Policing Matters on Police One. Go over there and actually listen to some of the cool guests that Jim has. So I thoroughly recommend that. Even if you're not in policing, if you're in EMSing, it's all about public safety. And some of the guests and some of the knowledge they impart is fantastic. Also, please make sure that you like and subscribe. And don't forget that we're not only on audio, we're also on video. So we are wherever you get your podcast from. And also we're on YouTube at the EMS One YouTube page. So not only can you hear us, you can also see us. And particularly today, if you're listening, switch over to YouTube, have a look. Dave has given us some amazing graphics to illustrate the points that he's been making, and actually we'll bring Dr. Studnek back in, and obviously the points that Dr. Studnek is going to talk about, because you are embracing these concepts, and obviously you were over in Charlotte doing some amazing stuff, and now you've moved over to command your own ship, let's say, in Wake County. And you've been you are all in for this particular process, and obviously you have a project that you want to talk about. So why don't you we'll do the reset. So Dave's given us the route map. Talk about how you've applied this actually and practically.
Yeah, so thanks, Rob, and thanks, Dave, for outlining the system. I've had experience using quality as an organizational strategy for probably the last 10 years. In some form or fashion, as it's grown into the product that Dave and his colleagues have published. And I recommend people go take a look at it, because when I think about this at a very high level as an EMS leader, when I think about what I need to accomplish today, I need to think about which one of those 5 activities is most important in driving my organization towards the goal that I wish it to achieve today, this week, this month, and in this year. Because these really are the activities that a leader should be engaging with their staff, with their co-leaders, in how they manage a system. One thing that I think is really easy to kind of pull out as an example is I just want to think about like cardiac arrest survival for a second. And cardiac arrest survival as an improvement project and as improvement methodology, I think it's been talked about exhaustively in the EMS space, but let's look at it through this lens of an organizational structure relative to quality, and touch on some of the pieces that Dave highlighted, right? So first, I always like to start with purpose, right? And a purpose of an EMS agency in some form or fashion is to be clinically excellent, provide clinical care in a timely manner. You see many mission statements phrased with those types of words in it, and it helps you understand your purpose. And really, ideally, what we think about from an EMS perspective is we are some of the only people that can have a meaningful impact on an individual whose heart has stopped, right? And if you think about that as our purpose is to treat the acutely ill and injured. Now, small percentage of what we do, right? It's not the most of what we do, but we are uniquely positioned to manage that group of people. So if we understand that as our purpose to help care for those folks, really it increases a sense of urgency about what I should be looking at and what I should be caring about. And that helps us when we think about what our system is designed to do, right? And so is our system designed to provide rapid response care and treatment to the acutely ill or injured, those that are having an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest? Can we see how we would want to align ourselves in a way to be able to put ourselves in a position to provide that type of care? And then fundamentally, you can start asking yourself, what is my performance, right? If I know I'm responsible for providing care to people in cardiac arrest, if I know that's my responsibility, do I know how I'm doing at that? Do I have measures of survival to hospital discharge? Do I have measures of what our chest compression rate and chest compression depth are? Do I know how quickly we defibrillate a fibrillating heart? Can I see that set of measures, and do I know how I'm performing? Once I understand that, and if I'm not happy with my performance, I can implement performance improvement tools to help change how we're caring for patients. And that starts to wrap around what Dave was talking about, those pieces, right? Do we know what we're responsible for? Do we know how we're performing at it? Do we know why? And do we care enough to improve? And can we improve? And I think that this strategy allows you to outline all of those pieces together. And when I was in Charlotte, we had an opportunity to implement the system, and we had an opportunity to use it in the real world example of cardiac arrest survival, where we had good performance, right? We were above middle of the pack in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest survival, but we hadn't pulled out the pieces, right? We hadn't pulled out our measure set to determine how we were doing in each individual process aimed at our outcome. And we were able to implement some solutions that improved our out-of-hospital cardiac arrest survival to, in my opinion, among the best in the country. And now that was more than just reading a book, right? It was more than just understanding diagrams. It was actual improvement science and improvement work. But the framework that's laid out, those activities put you and your mind in a direction. And once you see that direction, then you can start to take action, right? It's not just enough, is kind of semi-famous quote that I'll butcher. It's not just enough to try hard, right? Like we all go out and we try hard every day. First, you have to know what you're doing, and then you have to try hard at that. And I think this organization viewed as a system really allows us to do that type of work.
Excellent. So you are, of course, the leader of your organization, and you are a proponent of this. You're sold on the process. Obviously, you are now 8 months into your new job. How are you either introducing it or encouraging those that now work with you? And obviously, you mentioned the example in Charlotte there. You're now, the chief in your own right. How are you introducing this into your new system, and is it being, embraced and adopted?
Yeah, it's really, funny. Dave sent me a note early in my tenure that this book was going to come out, and I think I sent him a snapshot of my my old manual that's, loose leaf paper and notes, and it was on my new desk in Wake. And I was like, hey, funny that you mentioned that. I've got the old book out, and we're starting step by step. And so we have started talking about those 5 fundamental pieces. For me, moving into a new organization, it's really important for me to be the one that is doing the system for obtaining information, right? I need to be out seeking, understanding, asking why. And then once you spend a little time in that space of learning and understanding and seeking information, I think it's critically important to start talking about purpose, right? What is it that we're here to accomplish? Do you know, as an individual leader within our organization or an individual provider, what it is you're here to do? Are we all aligned with the same vision and the same set of values? And if we can see that, then we can start understanding and articulating who we want to become. And if we can understand who we want to become, that inserts itself into our planning process. What strategies and tactics do we need to undertake in the next 12 to 18 months? Right? It helps us understand and outline what are our important areas for improvement and improvement projects. And also, if you understand what you're responsible for, we can start to ask the question, do you know how you're doing at that? And when I ask that, I mean, do you have a measure? Right? Do you have a control chart? Do you have something that helps us understand where you are in your performance? And I think you can slowly start to roll out a program like this if you anchor yourself on purpose, right? And just start talking about those activities. And it is a big culture. It is a big piece of culture, I believe. And when you're moving into a progressive system that has a long history of excellent performance like Wake County EMS does, right? These things don't change overnight. What you do is you start to chip away and ask, how can we be better? Who do we want to be? How do we want to be known? And this system, I believe, will help us drive towards excellence.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And if you're listening, just flick onto YouTube for a second, because there's a fantastic chart that Dave gave us, and it's called Viewing the Organization as a System, Measurement of the System. And it's a series of, and we'll talk about graphs and charts in a second with you, Dave, but in looking and assessing your system, of course, everything is linked and related. Now, back in my days in the UK, I was schooled in the Norton Kaplan balanced scorecard. If one thing is out of kilter, then everything gets knocked round. And it's a kind of a similar feeling just looking at your chart here. But I think there's a backstory to when I think it was Joe Penner was looking at the Charlotte organization and then just sort of started to red pen everything because it's all connected, interrelated, and dependent upon each other.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think was really interesting about that creation of that measure set, first we started looking at, like, there's interdependencies in every EMS organization, right? Everything we do as a department is linked to each other, right? Do we have, units that are out of service because they need to go get fuel or because they need to restock, right? That impacts our response capability and our response readiness. Do we have individuals who are focused on training and hiring new employees, and are they hired and trained in such a way that they're ready to act within the organization quickly? And those processes link together to our deployment strategies, right? We have to have enough folks on ambulances to be able to run the calls. And if you start to think about your system as linked and dependent on each other, when you start looking at measures, right, these measures all move together. And, it was a really fun time when we were developing the system at Medic and what our KPI deck should be. We'd had measures for a really long time, some form of control charts, and we had the names on some sticky notes, and they're printed on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. And one day, it was my former boss, Joe, who introduced me to the system. We were sitting at the reception desk at Medic's old headquarters, and we started moving these papers around because you could see that these measures were linked to each other. It's like, wait a second. If our task time, the time it takes to turn an ambulance on a whole call, if that goes high, our response times start to decrease. If we're not producing enough unit hours, we also see that our task time starts to get high because people are tired, right? And if people start to get tired, they slow down a little bit, and that's linked to response times. And if we're slow, what does that do to our STEMI times for 911 to PCI? What does it do to our out-of-hospital cardiac arrest times? And then you throw in some fleet measures, like if we have a bunch of unscheduled vehicle repairs, right, that has impact on some of our time measures. And we just started, pushing these papers around, and you could really see those linkages come through. And to me, that's what really cemented 6-7 years ago in my mind that, what we do, not only does it matter, but we all have to work together, right? And we all have to be a team when we are doing EMS, because if one of us isn't performing, it's going to have an impact on the rest of the system.
You mentioned fleet there. Of course, fleet is a major source of lost unit hours. And, we would always have the discussion of how many minutes in do we actually say, okay, this vehicle is now off the road, let's give you a new vehicle, versus trying to fix the vehicles. And those points make a big difference in your ability to respond, your availability for service, etc. You're just the whole system performance. So everything is linked and important. Dave, I've loved your charting and graphing, and obviously bringing the data to life visually. If we're starting from scratch in that respect, where do we start?
Well, there's a number of different places. So Jon mentioned the critical importance of understanding your purpose, right, or your mission. That's a North Star. It gauges some of the places that you need to think about. The second is, he mentioned that you're in service of achieving that purpose. The system is supposed to be built to help certain types of patients, or in certain ways. So Jon mentioned things like cardiac arrest and STEMI, and maybe there's stroke or other time-sensitive places that make up a small bit of the volume, but are the places in which ambulance service makes an impact. Those guide some of the places that you want to develop measures. What we typically do is create a couple of different framings like those to start to build in that vector of measures that exist. You mentioned Kaplan. Kaplan made the case for, in the Harvard Business Review, of creating a balanced scorecard. And there are the different quadrants in which you could focus. If you look at this example from Medic, you'll notice there's clinical care measures. There are measures about productivity and operations. There are measures about finance and reimbursement. There are measures about people and injuries or satisfaction. So you're starting by the things that you're already saying are important to the organization, what you're trying to accomplish, or what the organization is built to serve in the community, and you're adding in other things that matter, and you're trying to create a system of measures and putting them together. And as Jon mentioned, we advocate for putting them all on one slide or one picture, because you think about these like you're looking at your life pack, right? And there's a series of different vital signs that are about the patient. These are the same thing. They're the vital signs of the organizational system. The system map that preceded this is kind of like looking at a diagram of the body. It's the diagram of the organization. And these two are serving to help you figure out, how's my system working and where do I need to act on in my system in order to either improve it or manage it better.
You've just given me an idea for a new concept then. I was looking at the organizational slide, right? There are 12 frames there. So instead of the 12 lead, we have the lead 12. You heard it here first, folks. So small tests of change, Dave. You put me onto this. I've been a massive fan of this. And obviously when we're implementing stuff, we don't go wholesale into changing. So talk about those small tests of changes and PDSAs.
Well, one of the things that is essential is that, and so Jon mentioned, right now he's in the stage of trying to be the information gatherer, as he's kind of a new person in an existing system. At some point, you get to a stage where together you want to look at these things we've already talked about, like the system and the measures and the data that you've gathered, and start to make choices about what are the places in which you want to either create something new that you don't have, you want to design it, or you want to redesign something that you do have, but get better results. And when you do that, you like with anything, you call out a project, you pull a team together, you set up a charter, you decide what good will look like, what's the outcome you want to improve. And then if you're going to start to think about what you're going to change, it's often hard for us to figure that out because we immediately go to things that we're familiar with or things that we have recency with. And we need strategies that help us to kind of learn about the system we have and then make good choices. The Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle is one of our secret weapons in improvement, because let's say you decide that there's something you want to try, then how do we learn fast, and how do we make changes at a small scale that are low risk but that help us learn about the system? Give you a good example. We were in Charlotte. I don't know if Jon remembers this, but we were trying to figure out how to do a PDSA at Charlotte. And we spent a good deal of time over the course of the day wrestling through a couple of different ideas. We're just wanting to do something that could help the leadership team learn about the strategy. One of the things you mentioned earlier was fleet. And so we were curious about fleet and could we do a PDSA? And there was some data that we were looking at that was related to unscheduled and scheduled repairs and things. And so there were three definitions that we had that were related to the data. There was scheduled, unscheduled, and then like critical failure. And so we did a PDSA. It was right at the end of the day, and we said, we're going to go into the fleet, into the garage, which was just across the bay from the leadership folks. And each mechanic is responsible for 2 ambulances. And we're going to ask them to look at our definitions of the measures for the 3 different types that our data is based on. And then we're going to ask them to tell us which definition applies to the ambulances that they are actively working on. This was going to be like a no-brainer. We were just trying to get loosened up on PDSA. So we took these 3 definitions and we put them in front of this unsuspecting employee and said, okay, read these and then tell us which these are. And he looked down at them and he said, oh, well, I can tell you what those are. This one is unscheduled and this one is scheduled. He said, but that's not the definition we use when we mark these in the database. And we said, what are you talking about? Because this is a common theme in improvement and in quality as an organizational strategy. We assumed this was like a no-brainer. The leadership team took the definitions they're using in thinking about these data, went to the person who actually is touching the process where this happens. And what we discovered was that the definition of schedule that the mechanic used was when it was on the schedule, not that it was pre-scheduled. So if an ambulance arrived and was broken and in the middle of service, and there was a slot on the schedule, and he said, "Oh, we'll look at that at 3:00," that became a scheduled repair. And this was a classic example where a PDSA, this was a PDSA not of change but of gathering information, all of a sudden helped us to appreciate that there was a disconnect between the definitions that the mechanics were using and the assumption of what the data meant on those shoe heart charts. Now, it's an easy fix. You can go back and, kind of fix that and repair that forward. But it also helped appreciate that what might have been assumed to be unscheduled or unpredicted repairs, not preventative maintenance or things that you had booked because it was something that you had planned for, you may have had actually a higher rate of unscheduled repairs that took units out of service that cost unit hours than what the data said, just because we did a small PDSA. And so in 20 minutes, we discovered something that was very, very useful for both appreciating a disconnect in the linkages, but also in improving both the quality of the data and potentially the understanding of the system in a very short amount of time with very little effort. We did it on paper. There were no databases involved.
I love a good fleet chat. Of course, the other giveaway is that that chart that shows you your ambulance peak of day, your fleet maintenance chart is the exact opposite. In other words, your peak of night is when you should be doing most of your maintenance, because that's when you have most of your trucks available. There you go. There's my quick giveaway from the work that we did. Before we go any further, before we end, actually, I always like to ask my usual ending question of, is there anything I've forgotten to ask or anything you need to tell me? And I'll come back to you for the book plug in a second, Dave. But any final thoughts, Dr. Studnek?
Yeah, I think that when we think about quality as an organizational strategy, I would just reiterate that if you're a leader or an EMS professional that's interested in being a leader, this is a guide for your day-to-day work. I think quality is very important in the EMS industry. We have to have our eye on that. And these 5 activities really help you align what your responsibility as a leader are, and give you guidance in how you can go about your day-to-day work to making sure you successfully guide an organization so that they provide the highest level of care possible in your community.
Right. And Dave, give us your final thought, and also give us a resume of the book and where we can find it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, my first leadership role when I was the youngest commander at Austin EMS back around the turn of the century. And I was the chief quality officer. And the assumption of my job, I was literally, my wife used to say I was the internal affairs division of one. People would page me to confess when they had deviated from a standard. And one of the things that I quickly learned when I was investigating these individuals is that they were one of many, because the system was set up for them to fail. Almost everything that I looked at, very rarely was it about a bad employee or somebody who did something wrong or was uninformed. It was actually about the fact that they were in a system that wasn't built for them to be successful all the time. And so periodically people failed because of that. And so probably one of the most fundamental things that I learned and have continued to learn in improvement is that it's leadership's job to build the systems with their staff in order for those staff to be rock stars, to bring their full selves and be the best that they can be. I'll tell you, when I working with the team at Medic was pretty transformative for me. It was one of the first times that I did this method to its truest form. Jon, actually, I often attribute, was the one that kept us honest. He went literally through the entire workbook from the 90s and made us do every single step. I have fabulous pictures of this team over a year going through every single step. I think the thing that was so transformative, though, was this. I can't stress this enough. When I was a medic in Charlotte in 1997, Charlotte had just been resuscitated from being a low-performing county system, was struggling. From 1997 to the point that we started working together, Joe and the team had brought it to being and Jon used the term, like an above average, reputable organization that was a benchmark for any EMS system. And then they decided to go to the next level. They wanted to figure out how to be better. Even though they benchmarked really well, they knew that they had a lot more in them, and they just didn't have a method to do it yet. I think one of the things that was most transformative about the experience was that this high-performing team discovered all of the opportunities that they could perform even better. So it helped them to kind of look at the things that were right in front of them, see the places where there were gaps between where they were and what they knew was possible, and then sort of create a pick list to be able to chip away at with the model for improvement and PDSAs, to keep getting better and better and better and better. And over the course of that time, they went from being, an above average, I say that loosely, like a way better than above average organization, to being one of the benchmarks that I tell people about around the world. And hence why examples of their work exist in our book and in our future field guide.
Fantastic. We will put the link to the book in the show notes, Quality as an Organizational Strategy. I'll also drop in bios and contacts for everybody. And for the moment, Dave Williams and Dr. Studnek, thank you very much for joining me. And I'm sure that we will see you out and about at a conference or a lecture or a webinar sometime soon. And so thank you both.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure. Good to see you, Dr. Studnek.
That's been great. So we talked about quality as an organizational strategy. We heard from a leader that's actually implementing and executing. We heard from Dave, who has the theory and obviously the practical application of it. Do get the book. Do review the YouTube video if you're listening to us in audio. There's some fantastic examples of some of the things that we've been talking about. But most importantly, please make sure that you like and subscribe, tell your friends, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. So that's been another edition of EMS One-Stop. I've been your host, Rob Lawrence. Thank you to my guests, Dr. Studnek and Dave Williams. And until next time, bye for now.